In 2012, in his interview for the Russian language newspaper Russkaya Zhizn, published in San Francisco, Vladimir Medinsky, the former Russian Minister of Culture, claimed that the Russian people have an extra chromosome. After all catastrophes that befell Russia in the 20th century, from the First World War to Perestroika, the fact that Russia still survives and develops shows that our people have an extra chromosome. Despite the absolute absurdity of his statement, the Russian officials revealed an important detail of how Russians see themselves as a superior race. The so-called Russian world doctrine gave the so-called Russian exceptionalism a specific direction. An expansionist policy, justified by good causes, became Russia's primary objective. The Russian intelligence agencies succeeded in bringing their dream candidate Vladimir Putin into the presidency. At the same time, they faced economic and technological backwardness of their country. The idea of Russia's development in transparent cooperation with the Western world did not suit the Kremlin. The West's demand on human rights and other universal values seemed unacceptable. Therefore, Russians were offered an ideology instead of real welfare, basic human rights, or democratic values. So, according to what standards do the 140 million citizens of the Russian Federation think? My name is Gregor Razumovsky, and today I tell you a little bit more about what modern Russia is really like. The concept of the so-called Ruski Mir, which is literally translated as the Russian world, was to use the Orthodox faith, Slavic roots, and Russian language as instruments of control for keeping the so-called republics of the post-Soviet space under the Kremlin's thumb. The Patriarch of Moscow, head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Kirill, became its most influential mouthpiece. Notably, both Putin and Kirill are former agents of the KGB, which had a long history of suppressing religion. Kirill was lavish with state funding, and he began to transform the Russian Orthodox Church into a propaganda tool for the Kremlin. Churches that reeked of megalomania were built en masse throughout Russia and beyond. Religious holidays turned into large-scale events, and religiosity became mainstream among stars, opinion leaders and politicians. At the same time, church sermons became increasingly filled with the Kremlin's propaganda. Kirill proclaims the exceptional spirituality of the Russian people, them being chosen by God and their mission to unite the so-called Russian lands under Russian authority. That is how militant orthodoxy, a surprising perversion of the love thy neighbor theme, emerged and became an essential pillar of modern Russian state ideology. The concepts of holy war and holy struggle justified Russia's military expansionism. Later, priests of the Russian Orthodox Church, led by Kirill Gundyaev, began not only to justify the war, but also directly call for it. Revanchism, or победобесие, is the name given to the policy of the current Russian leadership regarding the memory of the Second World War. In the Russian context, the terminology for the Second World War was replaced by Stalin's term, the Great Patriotic War. The USSR's role in 1939 in the outbreak of World War II is denied. the aggressive actions of the USSR against the Baltic states and Finland are punishable under Russia's criminal law. Revanchism also interdicts any allusion to the crimes of Stalinism or the victims of Soviet repression. Instead, the cult of victory over fascism is actively upheld. Grand Victory Day parades on Red Square in Moscow are held, where the Soviet Union symbols and the ribbon of St. George are widely used. Another component of revanchism is the militarization of society. The cult of weapons is introduced in kindergartens, actively supported at schools, and promoted in blockbuster movies and TV shows. Slogans such as "Grandfathers fought" and "We can repeat" became national. Under Putin's rule, the concept that this war itself was a tragedy for just about everyone on the world. Russians are convinced that they are an exceptional nation of winners who have won the right to lead, read, suppress other nations. In January 2000, when Vladimir Putin was just taking his first steps as acting president of Russia, Russian publicist Andrei Pionkovsky wrote, "Putinism is the highest and final stage of bandit capitalism in Russia. It is the consolidation of a nation based on the hatred for other ethnic groups. It is an attack on the freedom of speech and brainwashing by disinformation. It is an isolation from the outside world and further economic degradation." If we compare Hitlerism with Putinism, we find many common features. These are the cult of a leader's personality, suppression of opposition, inciting hatred towards external and internal enemies. The key role of the political police, the Gestapo or the FSB, the creation of paramilitary youth organizations such as the Hitlerjugend and the UNAMIA, a powerful system of official ideology propaganda, the monopolistic control over mass media with the aim of systematic disinformation, an aggressive foreign policy, and of course war as a method of obtaining foreign policy goals. History shows us the prospects of such a system of social relations. Perhaps Andrei Pionkovsky's last prediction, made 22 years ago, is coming true. Putinism is a coup de grâce to the head of Russia. In his column for the New York Times, the well-known historian and professor at Yale University, Timothy Snyder, reflects on the essence of Russian fascism. Snyder believes that in the Second World War, Nazi Germany was defeated, but not the fascist ideology. To quote, as a cult of irrationality and violence. It could not be vanquished as an argument. So long as Nazi Germany seemed strong, Europeans and others were tempted. It was only on the battlefields of World War II that fascism was defeated. Now it's back, and this time the country fighting a fascist war of destruction is Russia. Should Russia win, fascists around the world will be comforted. Ukrainians even came up with a name for this, Russism, a combination of two words, Russia and fascism, which explains the essence of modern Russia. Russism involves obsessive aggressiveness, a belief in Russia having a right to use force against others, the desire to revive the Soviet Empire, hatred of people, genocide based on nationality or citizenship, filtration camps and mass intentional murders of civilians. Moreover, Russism allegedly gives the right to use weapons for a spurious and blatantly made-up reason, such as protecting the Russian language and Russian-speaking people wherever they live, however fictional the threat. There is even more to it. The very thought of electoral democracy is unbearable for the Russian regime. The idea of putting power in the hands of ordinary voters is Putin's nightmare. Timothy Snyder emphasizes this war is happening because Ukraine is a democracy. Were Russia to win this war, it would be a tremendous victory of all forces that oppose democracy. The victory of Ukraine is the victory of those who believe in the law, who wish to hold the elections and to hold the leaders accountable. And especially of those who are ready to take risks for these things. Some researchers insist on the complete absence of any real ideological basis of Putin's regime, saying that all varieties of the so-called Kremlin's ideologies solely serve as a cover-up for quite simple tasks, such as the preservation of unlimited power and personal enrichment. Russia has gone a long and stony way from an unstable democracy to an oligarchic kleptocracy. Power was concentrated in the hands of a minute group of former intelligence agents led by President Putin. The group that was lucky and sly enough to defeat its competitors by using force and cunning. In the early days of Putin's rule from 2000 to 2004, he flirted with the West and demonstrated his readiness for negotiations, but under certain conditions. Putin recognized the global leadership of the West in exchange for unlimited freedom of action on the post-Soviet states' territory. For its silent non-interference, the West was offered special bonuses such as cheap gas, profitable investment projects, storage and spending of the Russian capital on the European markets. If the agreement were to have been implemented, the spheres of influence were to be shared. Europe would have a reliable raw material supplier in the form of Russia, and Putin would gain control over the territory of Eurasia from the border of Norway to Afghanistan. However, Moscow did not want to offer any form of mutually beneficial cooperation to its sovereign neighbors, but only the direct subordination to the dictate of the Kremlin. Such an aggressive proposal, predictably, was not accepted. Russia was unable to establish control even in those markets it had determined for itself. Meanwhile, in Russia, the security forces finally prevailed over the businessmen. After the state nationalized the gas giant Yukos and imprisoned its head, the Russian force structures subordinated the main financial and raw material flows in the country. The unstable Russian democracy was irreversibly transformed into a Chekist and oligarchic autocracy. After some period of capital accumulation, mostly by non-legal means, the criminal world also needed to establish an agreement with the security forces. And this is how the three best organized structures of the post-Soviet Russian society, such as the Chekist, the criminal world, and oligarchs operating on the verge of legality, merged into a rather sinister trinity. Being tied with the common motives of personal enrichment, they accepted nationalist ideas as the basic declarative model. The revival of strong Russia and the end of disorder became useful slogans that successfully masked personal kleptocratic interests. This is the YouTube channel, The Power of Reason. Always remember that our true power lies in rational thought and a clear mind when we're threatened with the daily flow of disinformation and manipulation of news. So please, do the reasonable thing and subscribe to our channel right now.